we have 3 different sets of slides that we'll go through. The first one is talking about scientific research and ethics. And then the next session is going to go down into writing and how to write sentences to paragraphs and how to put together a paper. And then the third session will focus specifically on writing a scientific paper for journal or conference publications. So just wanted to tell you about RETHE, which is an organization I started last year. So RETHE is focused on improving the representation of Africans in scientific publications. We offer several different services. You can contact us via email. So if you've written a paper and need feedback, you can contact us via email. I'm on Twitter, currently not very active, but definitely on Twitter. So this is our website. You can check it out if you're interested. What we offer are workshops, so something similar to this. We used to do this in person before COVID. We would actually meet with people at different universities, different locations, and teach about science. Very interested in, and also teach that as well. We have a blog where we've done interviews with scientists in the continent. We've also written about different ways in which you can write. We're currently looking for people to write on that blog. So if you're writing and you're interested in sharing your experiences about scientific writing, please send an email to us and we'll be very happy to have you write your article. When you write a draft of your article, you're going to have someone work with you to make sure that it's to give you suggestions about how to improve it. It usually goes through one round of revision before it gets published on the website. We also have a mentoring program. We've offered this once so far, hoping to offer it again. The first time was 8 weeks. It was one-on-one mentoring for people that could be assigned to one-on-one. For those who could not be assigned, we had group mentoring sessions where we go through the manuscript process, talk about different parts of the manuscript, and then you also get feedback on your manuscript if you're working on one. We have several people who've participated in our workshop so far with written papers. We're going to try to start putting some of those on the website to promote it. But people are doing great work after attending some of those workshops. So I hope that you get something useful from it and that you can actually pursue your writing, whether you're writing for, a dissertation or you're writing a research paper. Just let us know how we can help. So how do you conduct scientific research? There's some things to think about. You want to start with a research question. People usually ask, how do I come up with a research question? And I have a few suggestions for that. You state a hypothesis, you test your hypothesis, you need data. In some cases, you have to collect data. In other cases, you might be able to get data from other people, and you just have to analyze that data. Literature review is very important. Sometimes literature review comes before data because you want to know what other people have done for you to put your research in the broader scope of things. And then, of course, there's analysis, and choosing analysis methods is very important, and then interpretation of your results. So how do you come up with a research question? This is a question that I get a lot. I would say the first thing to think about is, what are you interested in studying? So if you have a particular topic, let's say you want to study education, do you want to study education in a country? And do you want to study education in a particular state or province? Do you want to study in a particular city? What kind of questions are you curious about? The next step is to look at what has been done. So if you have a topic and you're not sure exactly what you want to study, go ahead and look at what other people have done on that topic. Read papers, read blogs, read books if you're interested, and then start thinking about what are things that they have not done. What are some open areas of research? In public health, we tend to have a limitation section. So if you write a paper, you always have a section that says, my data was not perfect because of this, or my methods have these limitations. You want to acknowledge what are the limitations in the work you've done. So that's a good place to look for gaps in knowledge. So you can see what people have done, where do they think gaps currently exist, and then think about how you can fill in those gaps. In terms of ethical standards, there are always things to think about. So authorship is one of them. It's very important to think about who gets included in a paper. Conflict of interest is another one we'll talk about. Data sharing policies, these would differ for different journals and different fields as well. So how do you share data? There's some data sets that are very sensitive, and you don't want to share those data sets if they will have negative impacts on people. Research fraud is another one we'll talk about. Confidentiality in peer review. So some peer review journals will allow you to either publicly share your review, while others make sure that your review process is double blind, so you don't know whose paper you're reviewing if you're a reviewer, and you don't know who gets to review your paper if you're someone who submitted a paper. Plagiarism is another important one that we'll talk about. I see questions are coming in. I'm going to pause at some point and answer the questions that people have. So let's start off with an exercise. So you're preparing a paper that involves a complex concept, but you're having difficulty putting into words precisely how this concept works. You see an excellent explanation in another published paper. Is it okay to use this explanation word for word in your paper without referring to the other paper? So in the chat, answer yes, no, or I don't know. Wow, so almost everyone has said no, which is amazing. So the answer is definitely no. You don't want to copy people's words word for word, because that would be considered plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? I guess we've kind of defined it, but I want to hear your own definitions as well. Go ahead and submit your definitions. So someone says copy and paste. Other definitions? Representing someone's ideas as yours, definitely. Copying someone's work without due reference, copying another person's works without proper citation. Plagiarism is copying word for word without acknowledgement, not being authentic with your writing. That's very broad. Can you be specific? Using someone else's work word for word, using someone's words without referencing. So these are all very good definitions. So according to the New American Oxford Dictionary, plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own, which you've all clearly defined in the chat. Whether you intentionally steal or unintentionally copy someone else's ideas, it is considered plagiarism. And it's a very serious ethical issue and can have severe consequences on your career if you are in academia or in other fields as well. So what could happen to you or your career if you publish a paper that is plagiarized? What are your thoughts? Share them in the chat. You could be sued. That is so true. If you copy someone's work that has been done, especially something that's patented, you definitely can be sued. License could be revoked. Yes, depending on your field, you could have very severe consequences. You can lose credibility, reputation. Yeah, you could be penalized. So these are all very valid points. You could be arrested depending on plagiarism laws. Defamation on one's integrity. Once your work is published, it could be pulled down. Yes, your work could be retracted. And that's not, that's not the end in academia, but it can look really bad on your reputation whenever people look you up and see that you have work that has been retracted. Plagiarism can destroy your reputation as an academic, as a professional. It can make it hard for people to trust your future work. Even if your future work is not plagiarized, people might be more skeptical of the work you do in the future. It can affect your institution as well. So it's not just about you. If you're getting money from a major organization, whether it's one of the major funders, you can destroy your institution's credibility because they don't only expect you to do good research, they expect your institution to also do ethical research. So it can lead to legal problems, as people have pointed out. It can have financial cost for you. You can lose your job. You could have a hard time finding another job. It could also affect the lives of others. And this is very true when you're a mentor and you have mentees in your group, or you have collaborators that are working with you, and you copy and paste something that can definitely affect not just you, but it can affect the other people who work with you as well. So, how do you avoid plagiarism? If you decide to cite a paper, read and understand the paper. So spend the time reading whatever work you want to cite and understand it. Because when you understand it, then you can write it in your own voice, you can write it in your own language. And sometimes you read a paper the first time, you don't really understand it. That's what I suggest is go and look for other papers that are similar to that or at a lower level and read them. And or if there are terms that you don't understand, look for the definitions of those terms, see if there are other papers that have written about those terms, and then try to understand them and then come back to that paper. So one thing that I experienced in graduate school is that when I started going to seminars, because we had seminars every week where you have a speaker come and present their research, at first I did not understand anything they were talking about. But as I spent more time going to seminars and I went to classes and I learned new terms, I learned new methods. Over time, I started to understand what people were presenting in seminars, and I could come up with my own questions. And so it takes time, it takes process, but it's always important for you to understand what you're reading so then you can write it in your own words. Do not copy and paste someone's text into your manuscript, because if you're writing, the temptation sometimes is if you have a lot of things to read, you might find a section of a paper that you really like and you copy and paste into yours, and then later on you get that you've copied and pasted, and then you leave it in there. So even though it's not intentional, it's still considered plagiarism. Something that I do is if I have a lot of reading to do and there's sections and papers that I like, I might actually have a separate text that is just copy and paste, and I know that everything in that file I have copied and pasted, so that I can come back to it and read it and then write it in my own words. But make sure that you're very clear about what you're copying and where you're putting it, and don't put it in your main manuscript because you might forget. Always check your work against the sources you've cited. So if you've cited a paper and you're reading your sentences and they sound very similar to what is in the paper, go back and make sure that you haven't copied and pasted. And if you do copy, always make sure that you use quotation marks. Literally copying and pasting is not the end. Like, it's not something you cannot do. You can do that, but use quotation marks around the text that you've copied and make sure that your references the original text. If you're working, so what else can you do? That's a typo. You can definitely copy and paste. You can copy large portions of text if you need to, but usually it's better to paraphrase. So if you read and understand, you can definitely paraphrase without copying large portions of text. Paraphrasing, so we've talked about paraphrasing. Text recycling is another one. And text recycling doesn't just apply to someone else's work, it can also apply to your work. So if you've written a paper and you've published a paper, this is your paper, this are your own words. you shouldn't copy and paste the same thing into a new paper, even though those are your words, because they've already been published. You should cite the original source, and you should try to rephrase it if you can. If you find it really hard to rephrase it, then use quotation marks and use it as a direct quote and include citation to your original publication. So, questions. Let's talk about the things we've covered so far.
Okay, hello everyone. Kindly ask your questions in the chat window. Everyone is muted for now, Elaine, so.
Yes, that's what I meant. So if there are no questions, I can continue. So question, if you rephrase a copy text, is it considered plagiarism? No, it's not. If you've seen someone else's idea and they've written about it, and then you take it and you rephrase it in your own words, like you use your own words, it's not considered plagiarism, but you still have to cite the original source because the original idea is not your idea. The author, if you rephrase it in your own words, you still need to cite the author because again you're getting your idea, not yours. More explanation on authorship. So authorship, different journals have different expectations for authorship. So some journals will say the general expectation is that everyone who is included as an author has contributed substantially to the work. So they are able to defend the work. So if someone comes to them and say, why did you make a decision about doing this analysis, or why did you use this data source, they should be able to explain why that happened. So that's the usual expectation of authorship. But different people can contribute different things to a paper, and journals now ask you to say what different people have contributed. So someone could mainly do analysis, someone could have done the literature review and then help in writing the paper. Someone could have created the visualizations and then help interpreting the results. So different people can have different things, but they have to substantially contribute to the work. They can't just have their name there because they're your best friend. Is there a limit to what you can cite as quote? There is no limit to how much text you can cite or quote, but it's generally acceptable. Like you don't want half of your paper to be someone else's text, right? So you want to think about what works in the context of your manuscript, how much do you need to directly quote, and how much can you write in your own language. Is there any particular grade range before you can be accepted to a PhD, especially moving from BSc to a PhD directly? Uh, I don't think there is. Different universities have different expectations on where you should be when you're applying to a PhD. I know many people who have gone directly from BSc to PhD and did pretty well. But again, different people have different experiences as well. What is the percentage of cited work that should be in your work? There isn't any rule on how much citation should be included in your work. It's definitely up to you, and it also depends on the paper that you're trying to write. So if you're trying to write a research paper, the results should definitely be your own words. The methods can be cited from other sources, but you should also explain that in your own words because you did the analysis. The discussion should be in your own words. So where a lot of citations come in is in the introduction, and you can have some in the discussion as well and the methods. But in the discussion is usually to support your findings or to show how other people's findings are different from yours. So we've talked about copying text. If you copy a quoted work, do you cite the immediate author, the original author, or both? I'm not sure I understand that question. So if you copy a quoted work, do you cite the immediate author, the original author, or both? So if you're copying a quoted work from a paper that is quoting someone else's work, then you want to cite the original author. You would cite both papers if it's not quoted. If someone else had written about an idea and then added your own ideas to it, then you have to cite both papers. But if it's just someone else's idea and it's not the idea of the intermediate paper, then you should cite only the original one. Is there a maximum number of authors? No, there isn't. I've been on papers that have almost 1,000 authors, so there actually isn't. What is the best way to state a research work for reviewing? I'm not sure I really understand that question either. We're going to talk a lot more about how to write a research paper. Is academia okay? This look like live questions. Academia for everyone? Seriously? Of course not. It's not for everyone. All right, let's move on to the next section. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of these questions. So I answered some of the questions about authorship, but in general, it's expected that all authors have contributed substantially to the conception and design of a work, drafting of the manuscript, and final approval of the manuscript. So before a paper is published, all the authors have to say yes to that paper being published. They have to approve what they've read, and if they've contributed to that, whatever they've contributed, they should be able to defend it. So we talked a little bit about conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are financial or other considerations that have the potential to bias a researcher's professional judgment. It could be conscious or unconscious. It still counts as a conflict. So it's very important to think about what are areas in your research, what are areas in your background that could be considered as a conflict by the academic community or by whatever audience you're communicating to. So can we think of some examples of potential conflicts of interest? Please share in the chat. Is there a different way to write a PhD application? So that's a good question. It seems like a few people are applying to grad school. So for those of you applying to grad school, the PhD application differs from one school to another. And I would say look at the expectations of what the school wants you to have. So they might ask you to write a specific essay, and they would describe what kind of essay that should be. And it's different from a manuscript for journal publication. But I've also, as part of Rethe, reviewed people's essays. So if you are working on an essay and need feedback, feel free to send it to Rethe. So a major issue I experience are cases of documenting thoughts only to find something similar online. What do you do in such cases? It's already been taken. So it means someone thought about it before you. So even though it's you have these as your own idea, if someone else has already documented, then you have to cite them. So please share in the chat what some examples of potential conflicts of interest. Sponsorship is one, yes. So if you're being sponsored by a particular company basically if you're receiving money from a company and then you do research for that company, it would be considered a conflict of interest. Yes, so conflict of interest is, let me go back to the definition, but let me give you examples because I think it might help. So financial, and we're going to have more exercises later. So conflict of interest is basically whenever there is whether it's money involved, whether it's ownership of a part of the company, whether it's maybe you have a family member working in a company, let's say your spouse is working at a company, and then that company asks you, let's say, let me use Coca-Cola for example, because they've been used a lot. Let's say you have shares in Coca-Cola, you have a lot of shares in Coca-Cola, and then they come to you and say, oh, we want you to do research that shows that drinking Coke is good for people. And then you do that research. Whatever your findings are, if your findings are confirming that, people would be suspicious of it, because they would say you've had money from these people. So how are we supposed to trust that your research is unbiased? So it's any consideration that has a potential to bias your research, that has a potential to influence your research in a particular direction, that would be considered a conflict of interest. All right, we'll come back to these. We'll do some examples later. So research fraud is another one that is very important to think about. So research fraud is basically fabrication of research data or results. This happens. Falsification is when you manipulate data, you manipulate research processes to make your research lead to a particular conclusion. So you can have maybe you've done analysis on. So let me give you. I mean, they're very similar, but fabrication would be like you don't have any data. You haven't collected any data for your experiment, and you sit down and you think, okay, here's a question I want to answer. I'm going to make up data to answer this question. People do that and they get published in high impact journals, and then they get caught. So that's an example of fabrication. Falsification would be you've done your analysis, you have your data, but you don't like what the data is telling you. You want the data to give you different results. So you go in and you make changes to your data so that it gives you the results that you want. That would be falsification. So when you do research, never change or manipulate your data to give you results that you want. Always keep the data you use to create images or the data you use for analysis. So what I do is I have multiple files. I would have the original data set, and then I'll have a copy of the data set that I get to work with when I'm doing analysis, because sometimes you maybe come up with new estimates and you add it to that file and something might get changed. So it's always important to keep the original file so you can go back to it and make sure that you haven't made changes to your data intentionally or unintentionally. So let's go through some examples, because it seems like people are not completely understanding some of the concepts. So here's an example of an Australian, you can find it online, Australian scientist that admitted fabricating research data. They basically made up data that was not there, and they published their papers in very high impact journals that definitely had impact on the research field. And when they were found out, their papers were drawn back from publications, and they were retracted. They had to resign from their research position. It definitely affected your research, their reputation as a researcher. And if you go to the internet now, you always find this person's name on there telling you that they've fabricated research. So it's not a good thing to do. Here's another example. This one involved actually a hospital here in Boston where I'm based. And it was the researchers that made changes to the data. And because the money was coming from the government, they had to pay. So the institutions agreed to pay $10 million to the US government, basically the grant money that they had received to do research. Someone says research is stressful. Research is stressful sometimes, but I think it's important to think about why you're doing it in the first place. So some exercises that we should work through to just improve our understandings of this. So put your answers in the chat. So you have worked on a study. The study has one major finding, but it is possible to split it into multiple studies and publish it as several different papers in multiple conferences. Is this okay? Yes or no? and explain why you think it's okay or why you don't think it's okay. So what if your co-author commits research fraud without your knowledge? How do you vindicate yourself? I mean, in some cases, people write statements and say, you know, my co-author did this. I wasn't involved in it. In some cases, the person who did it comes out and say it themselves, like I did all of this. My co-authors had nothing to do with it. So in a way, that kind of helps to clear your name. So some of the answers are coming in. So should you split your one finding into multiple papers? Someone says no, because it only has one finding, important. I would maybe make it a series. Why would you make it a series? I would like to hear more. No, because it just has one major finding. Please show the screen to the question you just asked. The screen is on, so I don't know if you can't see it. Sorry, but the question is currently on the screen. No, because all processes are needed to get in the final result. Yes. Can you explain why you say yes? Yes, it will bring different angles to the study. No, a research has to come to a particular conclusion. In this case, the answer would be no. And the reason for that is you only have one finding. But this happens where, you know, they've done analysis and there's one major finding, but then they want to have many papers from the data. So they end up writing many different papers of basically the same thing and publishing to several different avenues. That is not acceptable. So our next question, you're working on a paper, but your results are not as good. You can select multiple answers, and please discuss in the chat. See, so someone said they will contact the authors of the study. Someone says they would state that the study cannot be reproduced, contact the authors of the study. Yeah. You can definitely do both. State that the study cannot be reproduced, and you can also contact the authors of the study. And sometimes, you know, authors will respond because they want to help. Sometimes they will not respond, but it's definitely worth contacting them. I have done this in previous work where I couldn't reproduce a study, and the code was available. The paper was published in a very important and high impact journal, and yeah, I just couldn't reproduce it, and I still don't know how to reproduce it. So it is all issues that should be brought up and discussed, and this will definitely help the field because people would know. It's not always because the research was done badly. Sometimes it's just the way the data is collected or processed is very difficult to reproduce. So it's definitely beneficial to the field to be open about these issues. So you've written a paper in English. This is our third question. You've written a paper in English and submitted it to a journal for publication. The journal reviews and accepts your paper. Is it okay to submit the same paper in French to another journal or another language to another journal? Yes or no? So no, same paper, no, yes, provided you're making some conclusions, you're only transcribing your paper. You can leave that job to a translator. Oh my. So the answer would be no. If your goal is just to have multiple papers, then the answer is definitely no. If the other journal wants to translate the paper from English to French, then they can with permission from the journal that published the paper in English, they can get permission and translate it to French themselves and then link to the original article. But if your goal is to have two different papers and have two papers in your CV that says you've published two separate papers, then that shouldn't be done. All right, let's move on to the fourth question. So you have been working hard on the paper, but you're not getting the results you expected. The accuracy of your method is 88.7%, but you're hoping for 90%. Is it okay to report 90%? Yes or no? Also, can you please indicate the question you're answering to? Because I feel like some people might still be talking about question 3. No, no, no. No, no. So this would be a case of, fabrication or manipulation of your results. Because you know what your results are, but then you're changing them to something that's inaccurate. So our next question, you have been working on the paper with several colleagues at Data Science Nigeria. Your best friend who is not working on the paper is applying to graduate school and needs something to strengthen their resume or their CV. Is it okay to add them as an author to the paper? No. No, no, no. I've seen a lot of no's in the chat. So why can't you add them? And what can you do to add them if they wanted to be involved in the project? What would make them qualify as an author? Someone said yes. Oh my. Yes, if they can contribute. No, the other members do feel offended. Because they didn't contribute to it, they have to contribute to the result. Assign a task to contribute. Yeah, so if someone is going to be an author on the paper that you've worked on with other people, then they should contribute to that paper. If you're coming in and the paper is already done, then they should not. Yes, provided they help in financing the journal publication. No, that's not a good reason to add someone to the paper. Paying for journal publication does not qualify someone for authorship. Authorship, it has to be based on contribution to the research. They have to be able to defend the work that you're presenting, not just saying that I paid for you to get published. This one says, I can't add him because he has not made any substantial contribution. Very, very good point. But that's the normal. What is the norm? To add people who are paying for papers? Is that what you're saying? A lot of lecturers get authored based on the payment, and that happens, but it shouldn't be happening. So we do know that that shouldn't be the case, even though it happens. All right, very good questions and very good points. The sixth question is this. So this one deals with conflict of interest. A company your wife works for recently created a new mango beverage. They would like you as a researcher to study the benefits of the beverage. Is this considered a conflict of interest? Yes or no? And explain why, please. So I've seen both yes and no. So please justify your results. Why is it a conflict of interest? Or why is it not a conflict of interest? Someone says no, because it's your wife's company and not yours. Someone says yes, you would be biased because you love your wife. Someone says yes, because of the relationship with the wife. Okay. So the people voting for yes are saying because you will be biased. Yes, because your wife will deal with you. That's right. Yes, this because you won't want to say any negative thing about the company. So yes, the answer in this case is yes. So usually when you have to sign conflict of interest forms in journals, they would ask you whether you have any interest in this company or in a company that you're working for, or if any close member of your family has an interest. So if your wife benefits, let's say you say this mango juice drink is the beverage is wonderful and it's good for health and it has so many benefits, then your wife is likely to make more money or might even get a promotion. So that means you will benefit from it indirectly. And so it's important to think about this. And sometimes you might be unbiased, and people who would focus and have other people check their works and make sure they're unbiased. And it's not always the end of the world for these conflicts to exist. So maybe you really need research money, and if you don't have research money, you might lose your job, and you have reasons why you need to do this research. So the goal in that case is to be open. Like you have to reveal these conflicts. You can't just write a paper and assume that no one will ever find out. You have to say, here are my conflicts. My wife works at this company, and we might gain from this. And but here's the research I did, and here's what I did to make sure that my analysis was unbiased. So you can still do the research, but you have to be honest about what the conflicts are. So number 7, you're reviewing a paper for Black and AI. The research is interesting and you think you can do it better than the people who've done it. Is it okay to copy the idea and research it? Yes or no? And why do you think it's okay or not okay? So one person says yes, it's okay to copy the idea. Yes, so far as you reference them, yes. Yes, nah. A, it's not okay to copy. I've seen one of those. Yes, you can always improve on existing ideas. Yes. If your research gives you a new finding, yes. I'm simply contributing and improving. Ideas will be improved. Yes, it is. So a lot of people are saying yes to this. One person says capital, no. So the answer in this case is no. And the reason for that is as a reviewer, you're expected to keep the things that you're reviewing private. So you're not, when you're assigned as a reviewer, whether it's to a conference or to a journal, you cannot copy the ideas that you're reading. You can use that if the paper gets published, then you can build on that idea, but you cannot take the idea while you're reviewing it and start improving on it. So it's one thing if a paper has been published and then you say, okay, I reviewed this paper, but the paper is published now, I can use an idea. But you can't just review a paper, see an idea there and think, oh, I'm just going to improve it. No, because if you had not reviewed that paper, you would not have that idea. So in a sense, you're stealing from someone else. And so when you are a reviewer, you're expected as your ethical duty to not copy what other people are doing or have done when you're reviewing. So further explanation. So there are two cases here. As a reviewer, when you go to review a paper, you're expected to keep what you review confidential. So I cannot take a paper from a journal or a grant or any kind of written material and then share it with other people or take that idea and make it my own, because I am trusted as a reviewer to just give feedback on that idea. It's not my place to copy it. But if the paper gets published, after the paper has been published, if I decide and say this is a great idea, I want to pursue this idea, then I can pursue that idea to improve it because it's now public knowledge. But as long as you're reviewing it, it's your ethical responsibility not to copy. So number 8, which of these would be considered a conflict of interest? You run a company that would benefit from your research. You're asked to review a manuscript submitted by someone you work with. Your wife is working for the company, commissioning the research, all of the above. So see D, all of the above, all of the above, D, 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 A and C, all. Okay, this is a good question. So let's finish talking about this exercise. So it seems like a lot of people are getting this, first of all. So D is the correct answer because all of these would either benefit you or bias your opinion in some way. So if I get a paper to review a paper for someone that I work with, I'm likely to want that paper to be published. So even if the paper is bad, I might want to find reasons why, I want to support this because this is someone I work with. If I'm running a company, obviously I'm going to benefit from whatever research I'm doing from that company. And again, if my spouse is working for a company that I've been commissioned to do research for, I'm indirectly benefiting if that research is positive and helps the company to make more money. So these are all valid concerns, but it doesn't mean that, for example, in the first case, if you're running a company, you still have to do research to improve the bottom line for your company, right? And if you choose to they can decide, okay, I'm going to trust this person, or they can say, I don't trust this. I want to redo this research and see if the results would be the same. So in this case, there's some cases where you cannot completely remove yourself from the research. You still have to do the research, but you have to be open and transparent about what your conflicts are in this case. Well, sometimes it's not a conflict of interest. For example, I don't work for Google. So if I do research using Google's data, I'm not really gaining anything from it. Like if I'm doing a health research, I want to improve people's health, but I'm not going to get money. I'm not going to get any kind of financial, any other kinds of compensation that would be specific to me. So for C, what if you're divorced from the spouse before the work is completed? Will it still be considered? Oh my. Yes, it can still be considered a conflict of interest because when you started the work, you were married to your spouse. But if you're no longer in relationship with the person, then no, it's not a conflict of interest. So how do you declare conflict of interest in research? So for some journals, they will ask you to fill forms. So when you write a paper, they will ask you to fill out your conflicts of interest. So do you have any benefits? Are you getting paid by any company? Do you consult for different companies? Have you made money that could be viewed in any light as a bias in your research? So you have to fill out all those forms and state that. You can also, as a researcher, choose at the end of your paper where you have acknowledgement sections and all those extra sections. You can write a few sentences that say, I work for Google and, I have a capital, I've been paid by Google or sponsored by Google to do X, Y, Z. You just have to disclose that. And then people can decide how they want to view your research. So a question that someone asked about the last discussion we had is, what if the paper is rejected after the review and I have the idea to make it better? One thing you could do is contact the authors and collaborate with them to make the paper better. Generally, some people might view that favorably, some people might view that as breaking ethical conduct, because you were the reviewer and it's not your place as a reviewer to take that idea. And it's also sometimes hard to know whether a paper is going to be rejected or not. And I've had cases where the paper was in the public, so I'd put it in an open one of these preprints. I made it as a preprint, and someone published a paper that looked very similar to mine, and even down to one of the graphics being almost identical. And it's hard for me to, in a sense, I could go to the journal and say, this person's paper look exactly very similar to mine. They probably copied my idea, but I don't know if they had the same idea at the same time and we're thinking about. So sometimes it's hard to prove those things. But as a researcher, it's made me a bit hesitant to share things on preprints sometimes. So it affects the other researchers as well. It's not just you benefiting from it, but it also affects other people. So it's definitely important to think about what ideas you want to use and how you go about using ideas. Let's go to the ninth question and we'll continue the discussion. So you've been unable to finish an analysis because the conference submission, before the conference submission deadline. You have an idea what the results should be and plan to finish the analysis before the conference happens. So what should you do? A, submit the paper with the incomplete analysis. B, submit the paper with a complete set of analysis based on what you plan to do. C, do not submit the paper. What do you think? So some people say C, do not submit the paper. B, submit the paper with a complete set of analysis that you plan to do. B, C, do not submit. So I think either A or C in this case would work. And A, for some conferences, you can say, the analysis is incomplete, but here's what I plan to do and see if that conference will accept it. But in most cases, it might not because they want complete results. I say C is better because then you get time to finish your analysis and you can submit to another conference. You don't only have to submit to one conference. B, in this case, you're saying that you've done things that you haven't done yet. At least that's what I was implying. Maybe it wasn't clear. So if you've not done analyses, you shouldn't say that you've done analysis. That should never be something that you do. You either submit analysis after it's been completed, or if it's a discussion paper, you could write it as a discussion paper and say, here are the topics that I'm interested in, and yes, what can be done in terms of analysis. But you shouldn't submit a paper claiming that you've completed something that you haven't completed. So a question, so how would you advise in cases where lecturers publish your students' final year thesis without their consent? This is a terrible one. Lecturers should never publish a student's final thesis without their consent because the students did the work. One way to go about this is to, depending on how, if you're really passionate about this, you contact the journal and tell the journal you did the work as your thesis and this was your advisor and they've published it without your consent. And the journal will investigate then, and in most cases would retract the paper from publication. And so that's one way to do it, and then you can go ahead and publish your thesis. So C is the best answer. Personally, I think C is the best answer, but I know that for those of you in data science and computer science, a lot of people tend to do papers around conferences, so they want to submit to those conferences. So you need to look at the conference guidelines about what they want in terms of ongoing work before submitting, as someone just noted in the chat. So I think this is the last question for this portion. So you're writing the paper using the same methods you used in the previous paper. Can you copy and paste the method description from the other paper word for word? Yes or no? So I'm seeing a lot of no's. Someone even recommended using Grammarly. I have never used Grammarly, so I don't know. Yes, if referenced. I like that answer. But you have to put it in quotes. So if you're going to copy word for word, it has to be within quotes because you're quoting directly from the other paper. Not word for word, that's just lazy. Hi. If you copy word for word and you don't put it in quotes and you don't reference, or even if you reference, that's still plagiarism. If you're copying word for word, it has to be within quotes and it has to be referenced. So those are all the slides that I had for this initial section. We can go ahead and start the next set of slides, or we could just have a few minutes of questions actually while I do that.
Okay. Thank you, Elaine. We can take questions now. The session ends at 4:30. We seem to have a lot of questions from the chat. So Tim, please let's talk to Elaine. She has answers. And so please, so Elaine, please, you can answer questions from the chat window.
Yeah, okay, great.
Let's work with that.
Yes, sounds good. So do you have anything you want to present at the end? Should I leave time at the end for any kind of presentation?
No. Soon there will be a general session in the main room.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
that is going to be announced.
Perfect. So I have 3 sets of slides. If people don't have questions, we can start on the other set and then continue it tomorrow.
Okay, so Tim, should we go to the next set of slides? You can answer yes. If we have 5 yeses, we'll go. Okay, yes. Okay, the vote is complete. We have 5.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to skip this because this is things that I already showed you before. And again, if you're interested in writing an essay for the blog, feel free to send an email to rethed.org@gmail.com. We're looking for writers, especially for 2021. So please go ahead. So let's talk about writing in general. Now we've talked about research, we talked about research ethics, which is very important if you're going to do research. So let's go ahead and talk specifically about how we can write and write better. So someone asked a very good question. Can undergrads publish papers? Yes. Yes, you can. And if you have opportunities as an undergraduate to publish papers, you should do it, especially if you plan to go to graduate school, because it's going to help you with your graduate application and will help you get into very good schools. Someone wants to see the Rethed slide again. All right. Okay, so let's talk about writing. So good writing is important, not just for publishing papers, it's good for communicating with your colleagues, with the public. It's good for furthering your career. So if you're in a career where you have to write, most people in careers where they have to write, at least send emails. If you know how to write well, you can write very good emails and you can, convince people on different subjects that you're trying to convince people on over email, or just communicate different ideas over email. So the information covered in this course will hopefully be beneficial to every area of your life, your writing life in general, and not just for academic publications. So how to write well. So someone is asking, let me just take a second for this. Someone is asking how a research paper is written for an application for a PhD program. So I don't know if you have to write, as far as I know, let me answer this. As far as I know, you don't have to write a research paper for PhD application. So what I was talking about is in terms of if you want to have a stronger CV or a stronger resume and you're planning to apply for graduate school and you have opportunities to do research right now and write papers, then you should do it because that will help your application. But you don't generally, as far as I know, submit a research paper for graduate applications. Yes, please write as often as you can. So anyone can become an excellent writer. To do this, you have to read. You cannot write without reading. Read papers in your field. So if there's a particular topic you're interested in, read those papers. Learn about what other people are doing in the field. Read books to expand your knowledge, expand your vocabulary. This definitely helps with writing. Also, write regularly. So if you're working on a project, don't wait until the project is finished before you start writing. Start writing as soon as you start the project. And the reason for that is that writing helps you think through problems. So if you're trying to define what your problem statement is, if you're trying to define exactly what you want to include or exclude from your research, writing can help you do that. Writing can also help you see places where you have issues, places where you have to study more so you can write a better paper. Always aim to improve your writing. No one is a perfect writer. I also still have people look at my papers when I write things, when I write essays, when I write research papers. I would send it sometimes to colleagues to take another look. Write alone, which is basically what I was just talking about. Find peers, find mentors who can help you write well. And if you don't have these mentors at your university, consider using Redfair. We're happy to look at your writing and send you feedback. So this is free. You don't have to pay for it. But if you do want to pay for it, we will accept money. So going into scientific writing, what is scientific writing? So scientific writing includes lots of different types of writing. This could be your lab notebook. It could be your project report, class paper, academic journal article, blog post, scientific magazine article, etc. So any kind of writing where you're trying to communicate scientific ideas or findings to a public or to an audience is considered scientific writing. So in a research paper, here are the typical elements that you have. A title. A title is very, very important. And some people don't really think about your titles. If you write a title that is short and concise and is easy for people to read and understand, they're likely to read your papers. If your title is too long and it feels like someone is reading, an entire abstract, people get discouraged by that. So think about your title. Think about how you can create a title that communicates exactly what your research is, but it's also straight to the point. Your author list. So we've talked about authorship, author addresses. Your abstract is an important one as well. And then you have the different components, which could be introduction, material, methods, results, discussion. So for different fields, the different ways in which this can be organized. Also, for different papers, the different ways in which this is organized. So depending on whether you're trying to write a research paper or you're trying to write a review paper or a viewpoint, you might organize your sections differently and you might not have a material and method section if you're not doing analysis. Acknowledgements are important. So for most journals, they will ask you to, if you're going to acknowledge someone, make sure that they're okay with being acknowledged in your paper. And acknowledgement sections usually include people who maybe have provided support, but have not contributed substantially to be included in a paper. So sometimes I'll acknowledge someone if I wrote a paper and I needed someone to just read it and give me feedback, then I will acknowledge them in the acknowledgement section because they didn't contribute substantially to the paper. But sometimes you might send out a paper to someone to just give you feedback and they end up doing a lot of work on the paper. Then in that case, I will add them as a co-author and not just acknowledge them. Literature cited is an important one. You want to think about what articles you want to include in your citations and the different guidelines for this, but you also want to be as specific as you possibly can to the topic that you're studying. Tables and illustrations always important to include because they help you communicate and summarize your ideas in a way that is easy for people to understand. Other things to think about include selecting the journal. So one way I do this is if I can't think of what journal to include, I will look at what other people in my field have published in, or if there's a particular topic I'm interested in, I will look at whether people have published on that topic in a particular journal before I submit to that journal. Look at journal requirements because different journals have different requirements, and sometimes you submit your paper and they send it back because it doesn't meet the journal requirements. So you want to check what the journal requirements are before you submit a paper. Look at the submission process. If a journal has a platform for submission, don't send your paper via email because no one will take a look at it. Use the platform that the journal provides for submission. Review process is very, very important. And sometimes you go through one review session where reviewers look at your paper and send you feedback and then you respond. Sometimes you go through multiple. So it's important to see this process as a way to improve your paper that will give you a better way of approaching it. Not all reviews are beneficial, but again, if you think about it as a way to better communicate, then you can see it as maybe a reviewer is asking you a question which you've already answered in the paper, but maybe it's because it's hidden somewhere that it can't find it. So that could be your opportunity to write a particular section in a way that's easy for people to understand and find information. So someone is asking if Red Hat does research collaboration. We don't do research collaborations. We mostly review your research paper. So if you've written a research paper and you just want extra eyes to look at what you've written, we'll give you feedback. The meta section should look like and give you feedback based on that. So I always like to start with a grammar review. I know a lot of people already know this, but I think it's just a good grounding to think about these things before we go to bigger things. So a noun, as defined, is a name of a person, place, thing, quality, animal, idea, or activity. And nouns function differently in sentences. So in some cases, you have it as a subject. In other cases, you have it as an object of a preposition. And you have different types. You have count nouns, possessive nouns, etc. Pronouns take the place of an unknown noun, and you can have different types as well. So you can have personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, indefinite pronouns. These are all things that are important to think about. And then you have your personal, possessive. Thinking about, I need to use a pronoun here, I need to use a noun here, you just write. But there are things to always remember because sometimes I read writing where these things are missing because people are not actively thinking about including them in their writing. A verb conveys an action or expresses a state of being or the relationship between two things. So yeah, we have a few examples where we have a transitive verb, she called her mom, an intransitive verb where he left, that's a very short sentence. You can have a verb that links to ideas, so David seems tired from dancing. Okay, so I went through that really fast. I have another question in the chat. If I want to write a proposal for PhD position, what type of papers should I review, peer-reviewed and submitted in journal or precedents from conferences? I consider those the same, peer-reviewed in general, because peer-reviewed captures both proceedings from conferences and journals. So when you submit to most conferences, the papers get peer-reviewed before they get accepted to the conference. So what you want to review is what is relevant to whatever your proposal is, whether it's in a conference or it's in a journal. In my field, we don't really have conference publications. My field, I mean, in public health, not data science, public health doesn't have a lot of conferences that publish proceedings, so most of our articles will be found in journals. So let's talk a bit about writing complete sentences. This is important because it's very easy to write an incomplete sentence. So a complete sentence expresses a complete thought. So it's not a fragment, which I give you an example there. This could be puff puff. This could be, so Mandazi is also a good example. Mandazi all over the table. So this is a fragment because it lacks a verb. A sentence, on the other hand, would be Mandazi flew all over the table. Mandazi fell on the table. Or, there are other ways in which you can write this, but it has to be a complete thought. Another thing that I tend to see are run-on sentences. So you have to think about whether it's a good time for you to stop a sentence and start another one. So an example here is, I thought the ride would never end. My eyes were crossed and my fingers were numb. Sometimes it's missing punctuation marks. Sometimes you can just split a sentence into two and it doesn't harm anything. And on the contrary, it helps you express your thought better. So a correction for the run-on sentence would be, I thought the ride would never end. Full stop. My eyes were crossed and my fingers were numb. Sometimes fragments can be used to create a dramatic effect, but usually not in scientific writing. So if you're writing for a magazine, for example, you could use fragments to create attention or draw attention to something. So a fragment could be 1 million COVID cases, full stop. And that immediately draws people's attention because they're like, okay, what is coming next? So fragments can be useful, but not in scientific papers. So some things to consider whenever you're writing is to think about where to put each of the building blocks. So your words, clauses, phrases in a sentence. So where is the action in your sentence? You want your action to be towards the front and at the end. So make your sentence exciting and make them easy for people to understand and follow. So I think I'll end here for now and just take questions. So if people have questions, we will talk about questions, and then tomorrow we will continue with the rest of the slides. So question, what is contained in the analysis? State a hypothesis and test the hypothesis section of a research paper. I'm not sure I understand that question. Can you clarify? Can someone write a research paper on any topic at all? That's a very broad question, but I would say yes. You can definitely look at what other people have done, or you can ask new questions about a new topic, and you can definitely write a paper about it.
Okay. Hello, Helen.
Hi, I'm Sia.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes to go. Do we bring it to an end here?
Yeah, we can bring it to an end, yes, so people have some.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining. You can go back to the main event. We're in a breakout session. So there are prizes to be won. So participate, answer questions, and Dr. Elaine, can you share the screen that has your details if they want to follow on Twitter, if they want to send emails to you? Yeah. I don't know if you have that.
Yeah, I have that on the first slide.
The first one.
Yep, it's right there.
Yes. So we hope that you engage with Grace. She's busy. So important questions. She's always open to answer important questions, please. Okay, thank you for coming to our session. This went well. Please join the main room so that we can close the session. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if you want to join the main room, when you click on leave room, it's going to give you an option to join the main event, to leave breakout room or leave meeting. Please click on leave breakout room.